What's up, guys? It's Connor here from Genesis of Androzani. This is the very first review of Doctor Who on the channel. We're just getting started here. Hopefully this can turn into something worth remembering, maybe, or something enjoyable. But we got to start somewhere, and what better way to start than to go right back to the beginning, 23rd of November 1963, with An Unearthly Child, the first ever story of Doctor Who. So, the synopsis. Barbara Wright and Ian Chesterton, two humble teachers during 1963, are surprised by a bright student named Susan Foreman. Confused by the contradictions in Susan's knowledge, Barbara had decided to visit her home, only to learn that the address on record is a junkyard. She and Ian decide to wait at the location until Susan or her grandfather show up. There they discover that the junkyard inhabited by her grandfather, simply known as the Doctor, and he doesn't want them lurking about. When the teachers refuse to leave, they discover that an ordinary police box is actually bigger on the inside. The Doctor decides that they know too much about his and Susan's otherworldly origins and takes them on a journey across space and time in his TARDIS, the place he and Susan now call home. Back in 1963, if you were watching this story, it must have been so amazing to see this new concept that was so different to what anything else you'd ever seen on TV before. And when I watched this very first episode, An Unearthly Child, it just seems to me like it's an absolute golden piece of television, and it's just so amazing to see how the show of Doctor Who began as a mystery, because really Doctor Who is a question, and it's like nothing like anything else you've ever seen before, because in most TV shows, when they introduce the main character of a TV show, they'll make the entire thing about them, and it'll all be about making this character relatable and obvious to you, and trying to make you understand their life all at once in the very first time you see them, so that it feels like you know them. But this is so much different to anything else, because the Doctor isn't even the main character in this story. He's actually the biggest mystery of them all. And the main character of the story is actually Susan, his granddaughter. And I find that so fascinating, that the Doctor being the main character, but he is the mystery of this story, and you just don't know anything about him. And to think about it 55 years later, even though I've seen all this Doctor Who, I still don't even really know who he is. So I think that's a great thing that they've kept up all this time, that we still don't know who the Doctor is, and that's why the show is called Doctor Who, because he's a mystery. So going on to An Unearthly Child, the episode itself, it opens up with those brilliant title sequence, that is just so innovative and new, and at the time scary. I've heard a lot of older people that grew up during that time said that the first time that they saw that title sequence, they ran away, or they put their hands over their eyes because they were so scared of it. The music frightened them as kids, and I just think it's so mysterious to watch. And I think that back in 1963, that's such a great thing to have on your TV, just this new thing that you've never seen before. And I really like how they use synthesizers in the music, because that was just something that you just wouldn't have ever thought of in the 60s. The 60s is all about contemporary and conservative, quite classy music, sort of not like it wasn't strictly formal, but it was just very, very proper, you could say. And this Doctor Who music was so out there and so different, but it was being shown on primetime TV. And I just think that's so cool how they just went with it, because they just thought, you know what, we're going to be different, we're going to do something that no one's ever seen before. And they went with it, and it's awesome. And of course, after the title sequence is that iconic scene where you see the policeman walking through the junkyard at Totter's Lane, and you see the TARDIS there, and the titles come up with An Unearthly Child, written by Anthony Coburn. And yeah, it's just so mysterious, and it's done so well. And of course, we're introduced to Ian and Barbara, the teachers from Coal Hill School. And of course, Barbara being a history teacher and Ian being a science teacher, it's sort of perfect, really, how these two are the human characters that we're introduced to in this show, as they, history and science are the two aspects of this sort of the start of the show that they're a big part of the original concept, being a show to educate children about history and science, and exploring different parts of the world and all these different time periods. So I think that was really a good idea to have history and science teachers as part of the story. And I just really like how Ian and Barbara are just so human. They're just so, like, it's like you know them already. It's like you've already had them as teachers for years, even though you've just met them. And I just really like how they're so intrigued by the entire story, and it feels like it sort of encourages us to be intrigued by it as well. And of course they come across this girl, Susan Foreman, who I love the whole thing, how she's so intelligent with some things and then she's completely unintelligent with other things. It really shows how disconnected she is from the society that they're living in 1963. And of course they're intrigued by her, and they want to know more about her, and Barbara mentions how where she says she lives at 76 Totter's Lane, it's just a junkyard, there's nothing there. So they continue to explore it, and I just think I love how 60s this is, how the whole retro look of the episode, and how they're driving up in the car to the place, and it just seems so it's not like it's not intelligent, but it's just very straightforward, brilliant television, done well, relatable, but mysterious at the same time. It's just such a perfect introduction to this show that we know nothing about, but you just want to know more. You're eager to find more out about this show. And of course, things commence as they are in the junkyard looking at the police box, and the doctor is there, and I think William Hartnell, the first Doctor, he gets a lot of criticism from people for being quite grumpy and old and sort of dismissive of people. But I think that people that haven't seen a lot of his work and a lot of his seasons, they don't exactly understand that this is a story arc for him. How the Doctor is quite ignorant in the beginning, but as he gets to know people, he changes and becomes a better man, and then later on we see with other Doctors that he becomes very protective of humans, and he quite likes them. So it's an interesting beginning to see that how he's changed over the years, and we'll get to that later. But I think I actually quite like that he's quite grumpy, because he's funny about it. He's just such a funny bastard. When they ask him, oh, is Susan Foreman inside that police box, and he's like, really in there? Are you sure? You must have imagined it. Oh, and I just think it's just so funny how sarcastic he is and how sassy he is, and he has no interest in meeting these new people. He has no interest in humans. He thinks that he is above them, but it's just brilliant. And then of course they make their way into the TARDIS, and it's just like any other scene where you see a companion walk into the TARDIS. It's just like they always see it for the first time the same way. It's bigger on the inside than the outside, and Ian and Barbara just can't believe what they're seeing. They're saying this is impossible. This is all a game. But of course, it's just so like every other episode, like of like a first episode of a companion discovering the Doctor and the TARDIS and all this stuff, it's all borrowed from this episode. Like you have to see this episode to understand that it's so original. It's never been done before. It's absolutely brilliant, and it really was a perfect beginning to what has become an iconic and great TV show, and my favourite TV show of all time, Doctor Who. And I can't say enough good things about the first episode of Unearthly Child. And of course, from here, it goes into the next 3 episodes, which is where they travel to 100,000 BC, sorry. And they encounter cavemen who want to produce fire. Now, a lot of people say that the first episode is brilliant TV, and then after this, the next 3 episodes are just really shit. I wouldn't go that far. I think that the next 3 episodes, considering the time period and how the show was new, I think they're alright. They are very primitive. They're very straightforward. There's nothing complex about the caveman story. It's just a bunch of cavemen that want to make fire, and because they don't get it, they capture the Doctor and his TARDIS team, Ian, Barbara and Susan. And I don't hate that story. I think it's actually, if you're a new viewer to this show, I think it's actually an easy to understand and straightforward story that moves things along while you get to know the characters, because I think in these 3 episodes that follow, there's actually a lot of really good character moments between them, and how the Doctor is struggling to get along with Ian and Barbara, but in the end he really comes together with them, and he saves their lives. He doesn't want to admit that he cares about them yet, but he does save their lives because he does have that instinct in him, that Doctor instinct, that he is there to help people. So I'm not going to go in too much about the caveman story, because there's not really that much to it. They just sort of get captured and they create fire and then they run away. And there's a bunch of characters in there, a bunch of caveman characters that are all fighting over, you know, who's going to lead the tribe and who's to trust. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. There's nothing that much to talk about. It's just a very primitive, quite violent episode. A bunch of stories, and I think it works for a first episode. One part that I actually found really interesting was when the Doctor was actually smoking a pipe, because that's just something you would never expect out of any Doctor that you've seen since then. Any of the modern Doctors, you just can't imagine him smoking a pipe, but there he is outside the TARDIS smoking a pipe, and it just got a laugh out of me. And I also found the caveman dialogue to be quite humorous. I like how they sort of talk quite slow and serious, but also quite funny. You know what I mean? And there's that I struggle to remember their names because, you know, to be honest, they are quite forgettable characters. But there's that old woman who thinks she knows, like she's like the, I don't know what you'd call her. She's like the one that knows everything that's going to come, but she's not quite like a fortune teller. But she sort of acts like she's the wise one. And it's just, I don't know, there's just something about the way she speaks is just so funny. But yeah, it's I also quite like in the Firemaker, the 4th part of the story, that that fight scene between the cavemen. It's actually quite violent. Like, I know that they didn't have a lot of stuntmen back then to do, you know, stuff that looked like a real, like, sort of action fight, but how they replaced it with, you know, the quite brutal caveman violence and how they cut away to the reactions of Ian and Barbara and Susan and the Doctor watching on, it actually gives you the feeling that this is really like they're really killing each other, these cavemen. And I like the brutality of it. And of course they escape eventually by running. There was a small moment there where I thought it was talking before about how the Doctor doesn't really care about Ian and Barbara at this point. Barbara falls over when running away from the cavemen, and the Doctor just runs right over. He doesn't care to pick her up or stop to care if she's going to get killed. He just runs, which the Doctor of later on would never do that to Barbara. He ends up caring for her so much after this, way in the future. But yeah, just starting out, the Doctor just does not give a damn about Ian and Barbara. He just wants to get out of there. Of course, Ian picks her up and they escape, and it leads into the next episode being the next story being the Daleks, and that's a great one that I'll get to next time. But yeah, I would say this is a solid start to a great show, and I'm about to give my rating here at the end. So for most stories I'll give an overall rating, but the thing is, I feel like the first episode, An Unearthly Child, is so separate from this caveman story that came after it, that I'm actually going to rate them as two different stories, and I'm going to keep it that way when I'm doing my rankings later and whatnot. I'm going to separate this into two stories. So the first being An Unearthly Child, only one serial. I give An Unearthly Child a 9.5 out of 10. I think it's an absolutely brilliant and flawless and genius beginning to this show, and I would change nothing from it. And the next story after that, I'm going to title 100,000 BC, being the next three episodes, The Cave of Skulls, The Forest Affair, and The Firemaker. I'm going to rate it 3.5 out of 10. Now that's not, I don't hate the episode. There's nothing that bad about it. It's just that with 55 years of Doctor Who that has come after it, there's just so many stories that are better than this 100,000 BC story. It's a very straightforward and easy to understand beginning to the show, but I have to give it a 3.5 out of 10 because it's not as good as everything that comes after it, but it's not overly offensive either. I think it's just fine. So that concludes the review of An Unearthly Child and 100,000 BC. Next time I will be reviewing the Daleks, and hopefully we can get on to reviewing some of the modern series, and we'll be doing other videos too, like topical videos and what's going on at the moment with Doctor Who. As I'm recording this, we're on the eve of the announcement of the 13th Doctor, and that we might make a video for that too. We'll just see. But hope you enjoyed this, and see you next time.